Hey there! Welcome to the 14th episode. Can't believe we actually made 14 episodes now of the Xamarin Code Hour. So the last episode we did was being able to embed Xamarin.Forms content into classic Xamarin. And this reflection in my glasses is killing me. How about that? Oh, I broke the illusion. Okay, yes, I am actually in a room. There is no green screen. Oh no, I've done it. Might come back, might not. In any event, my name is Lee Richardson, and this is a weekly podcast where I do screen recording, do live coding, and I'm hoping that you're here to join me live, and if not, maybe you're watching recorded, and that's fine too. So tonight's episode, I am going to get more into Xamarin.Forms and what it is and how to use it. And I'm going to talk about the different containers that you use and the different views that go inside of those containers. So we're talking about grids, and we're talking about labels and buttons and things like that, and how all that works and compiles down to native controls. And then we'll get into styles, and we will do, it's like cascading style sheets except for XAML, and that will be a thing we'll get into, and then data binding. So those are three things that with any luck we'll be able to accomplish tonight, and we'll just have to see how this goes. So right off the bat, let's start sharing some code. All right, here I am, and I am going to just start up the code that we had from last week, which, as you may recall, there was a main page with a calculator on it, and then we were going to get into implementing a second page that will look like, so the main page we have is the sort of standard calculator where you can add things together and get results, and the next page that we want to do will be the currency page, where we'll do things like converting $8 is how many euros. And the fun thing about this page is we'll eventually be getting into calling out to the internet as well, and when we start calling out to the internet, things start getting more interesting. But for now, we're just going to do the UI for this, and you will see that this is just started happening. I feel like at the beginning of every single episode, I get to show you something not working. How very exciting. We might just switch to Android for tonight's episode for now. That, by the way, in case I haven't mentioned it before, is the feature of Visual Studio Enterprise 225. Let's jump up the text size here. That is the episode, that is the feature in Visual Studio Enterprise where you can display iOS simulators on your PC. It's a nice feature, and sometimes it just doesn't work. So you can always go and turn it off by going into Quick Launch up here and do iOS, Xamarin iOS settings, and you can turn off Remote Simulator to Windows. But it doesn't matter so much if we use Android for tonight. All right, so this was where we stood last week. We had this currency view, and I'm running it right now, and we should be able to see it over here in an emulator. And all it was, it's very simple. It has a content page, which is the root container for all Xamarin.Forms pages. There's a content page.content, and that is what's inside of the content page. That element is actually optional. You can get rid of it. It's something you don't need. And then there's a stack layout, which basically, oh yeah, that's right. So yeah, we're going to open up this, and we open up the, well, scientific isn't exactly right. Welcome to Xamarin.Forms. There you go. And that is this text right here, which is the label, which is inside of the stack layout. The label is referred to as a view, and the stack layout is a type of layout. And so there's two main types of things that you'll have in Xamarin.Forms. You'll have layouts, which change how things are displayed, where things are displayed on the page, and then the things themselves, like the buttons and the labels, which are the views. So a label is a view. So one nice feature that we have when you're using XAML is the ability to preview the XAML before you run it, and that will help speed up doing UI. There's a feature built into both Visual Studio for Mac and Visual Studio 2017, which is under Other Windows. It's kind of hidden here, but you can go down to Other Windows and you can go down to the Xamarin.Forms previewer. I'm afraid that's a little small if you don't have this full screen, but Xamarin.Forms previewer, and when you open that, if you're very lucky, the chances are you won't be, but if you're very lucky, you might be able to see a preview of what your XAML code will look like rendered in both iOS and in Android. Sometimes you get one, sometimes you get the other. Often as not, you don't get either. This is a really buggy feature, I'm sorry to say, and it just, when it works, it's great, and most of the time it doesn't. And oh, here it is actually working in iOS. So that's cool. We get to see Welcome to Xamarin.Forms here. There are a lot of people out there trying to solve this problem. There's a lot of different competing solutions. I'll just go over them real quick. One is this Xamarin.Forms previewer built into most the primary IDEs you use. It works nicely when it works. There is another product out there which Microsoft is in the process of releasing to manufacture. It's not quite ready yet, but you'll see that actually it starts popping up. Here we go. Hey, now you can live run your Xamarin.Forms XAML using the Xamarin Live Player. They call it the Xamarin Player. It used to be called the Xamarin Live Player. I don't know. In any event, that's a really cool feature because you can run it directly on an Android or an iOS physical device. So over here, you open this up and you install this app called the Xamarin Live, which is this, and then it allows you to pair your device to your IDE, either Visual Studio 2017 or Visual Studio for Mac, and once you've paired it, you can preview your code directly on the device, and you can change both the XAML and the code, the C# code behind it, and it will render it in real time. And one of the things that's really cool about that feature is that you can run it directly on an iPhone and bypass the Mac entirely. And that's really cool because that is actually compiling Xamarin code directly on the device. Really neat feature. Also, doesn't work most of the time, at least in my experience, so I'm not even going to try and show it tonight, but I'll tell you about it, and it's worth experimenting with, because if you can get it to work for your device, it's a really sweet feature. And there's other there's companies out there that do this too, and I couldn't get them to work either. So I'm going to maybe talk about that on a different episode. But for now, the Xamarin.Forms previewer is working for me, at least for iOS. So we'll work with that for now. Okay, so what we're going to try to build out is this calculator here. I talked a little bit about the stack layout. By the way, the documentation is absolutely fantastic for Xamarin.Forms. So if you go to, let's see, Xamarin Developers Guides, you can open up Xamarin.Forms, go into User Interface, and then you get the controls reference, and they'll talk about the different layouts, which I talked about, and the different views, which I talked about. So under Layouts, just a real quick overview. Oh, here they are. They're all right here. The one you're going to see used most often is a stack layout. The stack layout over here just as you can see in the picture, it just stacks things like this, or that's vertically, but it'll do them horizontally too. And that's a really common one. The other most common one that we'll do tonight is the grid layout. The grid layout is just like a table in HTML. The relative layout is really cool if you want to say, I'd like this thing to be, this control over here to be rendered like under this control, or to the right of this control, or to the lower and right of this other control. And that is actually a really powerful control. Rumors have it that it's not as performant, but I have seen great performance from the relative layout. Absolute layout is being able to say, I want things to right align on the screen, or go to the bottom of the screen, or go 3/5 up from the bottom of the screen, or something like that. It's not all that common, and it's probably not worth your time. Obviously, scroll view, super handy if you have more content that can fit on your screen and you want the user to be able to scroll through it. And those are the main things. Those are the main things you're going to care about. And then as far as the views themselves, like I said, buttons. There's, let's see, okay, there's a lot of more obscure things. I guess activity indicator is not too obscure. But notice, and what's really cool about Xamarin.Forms is that when it's rendering on iOS and when it's rendering on Android, it's rendering in a native way. And so you can see this in these examples. This activity indicator, well, all right, maybe we can just zoom in. Wow. All right, there you go. Now we're super zoomed in. Well, you can see there's like this type of activity indicator, and the Android activity indicator is an actual Android activity indicator. That's really nice. And if you had Windows Phone, they have those little dots that go droop, droop, droop. I like you guys are like, do that again. Box view is just for showing boxes. It's useful for filling space. Button, obviously, real common, and you'll notice that again the iOS-y one looks iOS-y and the Android one looks Android-y. Date picker, those are this isomorphic one that you have on iOS, and Android has different, depends on your API level, you get a variety of different ones. Editors are multi-line texts, an entry for a single line text view, an image. You get a label is really common. We'll use that often. And the list view that's what we showed in 2 episodes ago natively. Well, the Xamarin.Forms version of that for just being able to flick through a list of things is the list view. OpenGL view, I've never used that, but I think it'd be really fun to do OpenGL work. Picker for just picking a list of things, a progress bar, a search bar that's kind of obscure, a slider, yeah, I guess you occasionally might use that, and a stepper, and the switch is like turn off and on, so that's used fairly often. Table view is originally that was an iOS specific thing, but you can see over here how you can use that to basically do settings. That's really good for settings. And a time picker, and a web view when you just give up on the native and want to just render some HTML. Okay, so that's a little overview of Xamarin.Forms controls and layouts. Hope I didn't go too quickly, but let's start digging into some of those. We need some buttons first of all, and we could probably, so if we followed the pattern that we did last time, we would have a stack layout here. And when I say last time, I guess what I'm talking about is, well, orientation, horizontal. When we did the first calculator view, and we were in Android land over here, and we had a layout, activity, standard calculator fragment. Oh, it's already open. Perfect. You may recall, this is from episode like 4 or 5 or something like that. Remember, we had these linear layouts, and a linear layout is just like a stack layout. In fact, you'll find a lot of parallels between Android's XAML, or AXML, I don't know how to pronounce that, and XAML. I think XAML was actually based on AXML, I suspect. I could be wrong. No, it's probably not. Who knows, chicken and egg. Anyway, so the way we did that was we had one linear layout going horizontally at the very top, boom, and then we had a whole bunch of horizontally oriented linear layouts for all of the numbers. So this was button 7, 8, 9, and the multiply label, which was like 7, 8, 9, and the multiply. But this layout we're trying to do is a little bit different. It only has 3 columns, and we're missing buttons here and here. So if we, let's say we took a stab, let's take a stab at doing this with stack layouts the way we did it in AXML. To do that, we'd have a button, and the text would be, let's do 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, and 3. And let's go back over to our Xamarin.Forms previewer in iOS. Okay, we have 1, 2, and 3. Oh, hey, it's rendering on Android now. How about that? You just never know. It's like a box of chocolates, right? Okay, so 1, 2, and 3. Well, the problem we have, you can see, is that this is not, they're not filling their space. And by default, in Xamarin.Forms, buttons don't, in fact, most elements don't fill their space. And so that's why you have horizontal options and vertical options. These are very common to put on things. If we have this here, with the horizontal options, we've got quite a few different options. These are really important to know the difference between, and I'm going to get into some of them later, but for now, imagine that we had, the most common one is fill and expand, and fill and expand just tries to fill all available space. Well, that isn't right because 1 is now disproportionately large, but if we set this to 2 and 3, you'll see that that works pretty nicely. Down here, 1, 2, and 3, they all fill their available space, and Xamarin.Forms knows to have them not trample on each other, and so they fill the space evenly. Space gets filled evenly. Now the problem is, if we were to take this approach to do, what do we got here? Blank, 0, and dot. We'll do 0 and dot, and what goes here? What goes there? The question is, can we just maybe make it disappear or put in a blank space? If we get rid of it, these guys continue to fill their space evenly, but that's not really what we wanted. So that's why I'm going to propose that the best layout is not a stack layout in this case, but it's a grid. And this works out nicely because we'll get to learn the second most common layout in Xamarin.Forms. So that works like this. We'll have a grid. Grids are not at all like HTML tables. They kind of look like tables, but they work very differently. To do them, you have to define ahead of time how many rows and how many columns they're going to be. The benefits of doing it this way is that the performance is actually pretty good. You get very good performance with grids, better than you get with stack layouts. So the next thing we say is how many rows we want. So these are row definitions. Oh, it's grid dot row definitions. There we go. Whew. And when you're defining your row definitions, you get to tell them what height you want them to be. You have you have three main options. Your height can be either star, auto, or a number. And so if you specify a number, that's going to be in device-independent pixels on Android. And remember, iOS kind of uses device-independent pixels, the equivalent of a device-independent pixels anyway. So if you're on a high-density display, 1 pixel is roughly as much space as it would be on a low-density screen. But the interesting things are the star, which says, I want you to fill your available space as much as possible. So if you said star, it would try to fill all of its space. If you had 2 rows that were both star, they would try to fill their space evenly. And so it's actually very similar to the fill and expand that we talked about earlier. The other option is auto, and auto is saying I want to just expand only as far as I need to fill my content. And you'll notice, if you are an Android developer, that this is actually extremely similar to fill parent versus wrap content. Those fill, those height and width options for the layout parameters in Android. Exact same thing. Fill parent is the same as fill and expand is the same as star. Oops. Star. And wrap content is the same as auto, which is the same as, well, just leaving it off, I guess. And most of the other options, I guess, as well. So if we just said center, for example, it would try to fill its content. Makes sense so far? Any questions? I haven't actually checked. Is anyone online live right now? Oh, there are no other. It's just me. All right, I'm talking to a recorded audience. All right, horizontal options. We still want that to be fill and expand. So we've talked about the different layout options. In our case, we want evenly spaced rows, I think. So we want 1, 2, 3, 4. How many rows do we want here? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And how many columns do we want? 3, I believe. Grid dot column definitions. There we go. And we want a column definition with a row of, what is it? Auto or star? The answer is column definition with a width, there we go, of, and the answer is star. And why star? Because we want them to be filling all of their available space. So now we're going to put these inside of the grid. I'm going to take all of our buttons that we've written so far and move them inside of this grid here. There we go. And there's already, we're getting warnings saying, hey, you didn't say which row or column you wanted these to be in, and that's true. It didn't give that warning on the first because it defaults the row and column to 0 always, and so that's why it's just a warning like, this doesn't seem quite right. You probably wanted to specify a row for your second item in there. And how do you specify row and column? They are using dependency properties, which are properties which are defined on the parent and get inherited down to the child. So in this case, it's a grid dot row equals, this will be 0, 1, 2, and 3. This will be the third row here. And grid dot column equals 0. Well, okay, we got the rows updating. Okay. Oh, the reason this looks weird, by the way, if you're following it at home and wondering why we're only seeing one button and one button, that is because with the grid, things will appear over top of each other by default. And so right now, all of the buttons are appearing over top of each other, stack, 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 and you only see the one in front. And by default, the one that's in front is always the one that's displayed last, which is why number 3 here is displayed, and number dot is here displayed up here. And we would see that change if we change the order there. Now the 0 would be in front. So there you go. Hopefully that makes sense. So let's put these in the right columns. We need to put this one, number 1, and number 2. And wait for it. Yay, there we go. We got 1, 2, and 3. And then this guy needs a row and column, and this needs a row and column. And the row will be 4, and the column will be 0 and 1. No, it will be, that's not right, because we're trying to match this. We want it to be 1, 2, 3, and then blank 0 dot. So to do that, we just need this to be in column position 1 and this to be in column position 2, and now we've got something that's looking pretty good, right? I like it. I like it. So let's just knock out these other ones. We need these to all be in row. By the way, do you guys know this shortcut? This is a keyboard shortcut that I like a lot. If you hold down the Alt key, this works in Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio for Mac. It's probably a pretty common IDE trick, but if you hold down the Alt button or Option on a Mac, I think, then you can select everything in a row and you can type. And you can actually do like simultaneously typing all in different columns. Alright, so the text here will be 4, 5, and 6. Then we'll need 7, 8, and 9 in, whoa. No, 4, 3, this will be 2, this will be 1. There we go, now we're getting somewhere. This will be 4, 5, 6, this will be 7, 8, and with any luck, 7, 8, 9, there we go. Good. And then the last thing we need is just the CE and the close, and we're going to use that same trick we did down here, where we just specified column 1 and column 2 and skipped column 0. Row equals 0. Now remember, 0 is optional, so I could have just not specified that. Grid.column equals 1 and 2. And the text of this will be CE. And the text of this will be, I don't know, ampersand LT semicolon dash. That's an old HTML trick. I imagine anyone that's done much HTML will have run across that, because you can't specify a less than or greater than symbol directly inside of text, so you need to escape it, and that is the common escape sequence. And I don't know if that's HTML or if that's XML. Anyway, pretty common trick. Hopefully no one's surprised at that. All right, how about this? Before we call this a commit, and we're halfway through the episode, so I think now is a great commit. We've done a lot of layout-y things. Let's just talk about this. Why does this welcome to Xamarin.Forms appear up here and all this text appear down here? The reason is because of the vertical and horizontal options here. If our vertical options, we had said center, what would that do? Think about it. While it's rendering, boom. Now that it's no longer expanding, that is just filling the space that the control would naturally fill and no more. If we were to say, what did we have last time? Center and expand. If we had, how about end and expand? What would end and expand do? End and expand, well, it's still expanding. That expanding thing's still there, so it should fill up all its available space, but now it's appearing at vertically aligned on the bottom. That's nice. Nice to know. And similarly, I guess we could have start and expand, and I think you can follow the pattern, right? If we have start, that's just going to vertically align to the top. If we have start and expand, it's going to fill all of its space and appear up at the top. So, you know, that might be a good stopping point. We can call this, I don't know, that annoys me. That is an auto-generated file that should not be in source control. And for some reason, Visual Studio wants to change our CSproj file. I did recently upgrade Visual Studio, so that's probably what that's all about. But let's just call this our keypad done up in Xamarin.Forms. Yeah, well, that's pretty much what we've got here. I think the next thing we want to get into is styles, and in order to get into that, let's start trying to fill in these labels up here up at the top. So this label, let's sort of mock this up a little bit. This one we want to say like $, and then let's do 2. I mean, these kind of look like separate controls, the $, and the 8. And they probably are separate controls because when we're changing from Uzbekistan currency, we've got a UB there and an 8. So that is going to be set separately, I think. So this is another opportunity for a stack layout, I think. Stack layout. And the orientation there is horizontal. Makes sense so far. We've got one more label that we need to plunk into here, and this will be the 0. Yeah. Our horizontal options and vertical options are wrong now. The horizontal option, well, the vertical option, we just don't even care about the vertical option anymore. Maybe we care about that inside of, I don't know. Let's just go with it. I think it's okay if we just allow all of those things to fill each other down, and we don't need to fill the space the way we had been. So this one will be a horizontal one. The text horizontal option in this case, we probably want it to just be the default. We don't need to specify it actually. Yeah, there we go. $, 0. The font's a little small. Can you all in the audience see that? Unfortunately, there's no one live watching right now, so there's no one I can get any feedback from about whether that's a good size or not. But maybe right back in the show notes, in the comments in this YouTube video, I would appreciate just a little feedback on sizing. Okay, stack layout, orientation, horizontal. We need one more of these, and we need this to be a Euro. I guess I don't actually know how to insert. I should know this. It's probably like holding down the Alt key while pressing the numeric values 5, 7, and 9 on the numeric keyboard or something, right? I don't know what that is, but that'll accomplish the same thing. And oops, what else do we need? Do we need anything else? We could put in a picker that says United States dollars. I guess we could do that, or we could just say that's good enough for now. Let's go with good enough for now. By the way, well, yeah, the padding really is I guess it's okay, but the padding overall I feel like should come in quite a bit, and so inside of the overall stack layout, actually maybe we can do it on the content, I can't remember. Let's try this. It's not padding, it's margin? No, okay, it's on the stack, a little bit on the stack layout. Margin equals 10, and that should bring everything in from the edges. Oh yeah, that's much nicer. Little breathing room. Yeah, that looks good. Let's call it 15. Okay, and we need to set these text fields to be bigger. Let's call this text. Oh, it's font size. Font size equals. For font size, you can do descriptions, like you could do small, and that will render into something appropriate on every device. I'm lying to you because that's not rendering. Or you can do the more common numbers, and I believe those will be in SPs, on Android, and SPs are they can be customized by the user. They're like device independent pixels, but they're for text. And on iOS, I think it's similar. Anyway, let's do something bigger. Font size 18. There we go. Ooh. Oh, actually, no. We probably want this font here to be like 18, and then we want this to have a margin to sort of pop it down just a little bit. And I think the margins, if you do commas, it's just like in HTML, it's like left, top, right, bottom, and so the left can be 0, but we want the top to be like 10 pixels down, and that will push it down by 10 pixels by adding a margin on the top of 10 pixels. And well, it pushed it down. Well, we want to push it down a little bit further, don't we? We want to push this down maybe to 3. And this font size could be even bigger. Let's do 24. It is, after all, the most important thing on the screen. Gosh, you could almost go 32. There we go. That looks pretty nice to me, actually. Let's just pop this down just a little bit more, maybe to 7. And you can see that Xamarin.Forms previewer is pretty handy. It's pretty good. It really allows you to do UI a lot faster. Now, at this point, I need this second one down here to follow the same thing. And it would be tempting to copy and paste, but wouldn't it be nice if we could do styles and define a single style that we could then reuse? And if we wanted to change all of the number values to be red or something like that, we change it in one place. So a great place to do that is, now it's not nearly as powerful, unfortunately, as cascading style sheets. I wish it was, but I'm just going to tell you the truth, it is not. But what you do get is something that's still pretty powerful. It's good, it's fine, it'll work. And you do that in resources. You can define these resources either at the page level or at the application level inside of the app.xaml. We're just going to do this at the page level because these are really appropriate to the page. And inside of here, we'll have a resource dictionary. There you go, a resource dictionary. You could also pull this resource dictionary from an external file if you wanted to. And then in here, we'll have a style. And we need to say a couple things. We need an X key to say that this is we need to give it a name. In this case, let's do the one for the currency value, currency, currency value. And then we need a target. I swear we need a target. Why didn't IntelliSense pop up? Apply to base resource. Based on? No. I don't know why IntelliSense is popping up, but I'm pretty sure we need applies to. Applies to equal, and it's red now? I don't know. Now I'm worried. Well, anyway, we need something that says this applies to labels. So that'll work kind of like that. And then we need a well, hey, maybe we get a nice error up here. Property target type is required. Oh, target type. There we go. Also, notice IntelliSense didn't work, but at least it didn't turn red. So that's something, I guess. All right, we have a currency value, and we need to set some things. We need to actually use this. So we'll say that we have a setter, and we can set a given property. In this case, we want the font, setter. What are we going to set? We want to set the property called font size. And we want to set it to a value of 32. Looks good, and we need another one of these for the currency sign, I guess, I don't know what it's called. And we'll be setting the margin to same thing that we had down there, which was 0, 7, 0, 0. And now we can delete the margin property and the font size property, and instead, and you can see they've gone back to 0, and instead we just set the style property to tell it which style to use. In the first one, the style, now this is going to be a little bit weird syntax here. You do squiggle, and then inside of the squiggle, binding, or no, sorry, static resource. You have two options. You can either do static resource or dynamic resource. A static resource says this will always be equal to the value that I'm specifying, which in this case is in the resource dictionary of the page. Or you can do a dynamic resource, which says that I may change the thing that I'm asking you to bind to. The thing that you're binding to may change at runtime. And that's really useful if you want to be able to have the user change the styles at design time. Maybe they want a light theme or a dark theme. That would be a great use of dynamic resources. But most of the time, you use static resource, unless you really don't need to. The performance is better for static resource, so go with static resource. So we want a static resource of currency sign. This one was, right? Yes. Pop the thing down there, and now we need a style equal to squiggle static resource currency value. Booyah, that looks pretty good. And now we just need to do the same thing for the euros. Currency sign and currency value and renderers. Nice, there we go, right up there, just how we were expecting it to look. I think that's good enough for commit. We'll call this introducing styles. We were displaying currency values and introducing styles. Bum, bum, bum. And yes, we had our resource dictionary up on the page level. We defined a couple styles, and then we used those styles down here. Good stuff. On to the next thing. Next thing is, we got 15 minutes, and that will be just enough time, I think, to show data binding. Data binding is what we did not get thus far inside of our classic iOS and classic Android. And we had to do everything, setting everything by hand manually. In code, we would set the values of these properties. That's how we used to do it. But now we have a super wonderful ability in Xamarin.Forms, which is to use a special syntax which says, I just want the value of this label or button or whatever to always be bound to a view model, view model's property. And if you change that view model's property, I want it to automatically, at any point in time, I just want it to automatically update directly here inside of the XAML code. And similarly, if you have a text box, you can have two-way data binding, and someone types in the text box and it shoots those values back into the view model. And you can pretend, as a developer, you can pretend that there's just a link, a permanent link, and that link is never going to go away. And you don't need to worry about life cycles at all. You can just set one, it always sets the other. Realistically, sometimes you do have to worry about it when things go wrong, because, you know, things go wrong. The nice thing is, if you watched any of the shows up until now, we have sort of done a lot of that by hand using view models and iNotify property changed, and so we will be able to take use of some of the same facilities where we did iNotify property changed in the view model to push down changes into the view. It's just now we get the benefit of this special data binding syntax that I'm about to show you. Okay, let's see how much we can accomplish in 15 minutes. So in order to do this, we have to have a data context on the page, or at least it used to be called data context. Truth is that Xamarin.Forms renamed it. When you're doing Silverlight or Windows Forms, it was called a data context, and I think even today when you're doing UWP, Universal Windows Platform, if you're building for Windows 10 or Raspberry Pis or the HoloLens or whatnot, that's still called a data context, but for Xamarin.Forms world, it's called a data context, binding context. There we go, binding context. And the binding context is the same thing. It exists on the root page and it cascades down into everything below it. Generally, you just set it at the root element and let it cascade down. You don't need to worry about that happening, but you could theoretically have one binding context here and another binding context here, and they would flow around each other as if they were flowing downstream. Nice imagery there for you. Pretend I'm in a poetry class. All right, the binding context, we want to set this equal to a new currency view model, and so that implies that we have a thing called a currency view model, and so let's create one. We need a view model over here. We're going to add a new class just like our previous view models. This will be called the currency view model. Public class currency view model. This inherits from view model base, and we'll have a couture in here, and maybe we'll have a property public string display. What did we call it over here? We're gonna have it's gonna be very similar to our previous one, the calculator view models. Oh, we called it just display. Yeah, all right, there you go. This will be very similar to that. It will have a display. You might think to yourself, Lee, you're copying and pasting, you are evil, and I think copying and pasting view models is okay. A little bit of duplication is appropriate in view models. It's not appropriate in models or other places. I don't know, write me some hate mail, prove me wrong. In any event, this is what I'm doing for now. So we're going to set our display equal to 0. And actually, we don't just have one display, do we? We have, let's see already. We have the, I guess we have like display 1, display 2, display top and display bottom. I don't know. And then we have a symbol 1 and a symbol 2, something like that. And we're going to set our, just so that it looks different, we'll set our display 1 equal to 0.00 and our display 2 equal to 0.00, and then we're going to set our symbol 1 equal to dollars and symbol 2 equal to, copy and paste that euro symbol over there. There we go. Got a euro symbol. And let's do this right way. Let's not instantiate this by hand. I think we were using a, how were we doing this before? I think we had a service container. We were using a service locator pattern, which some people will tell you is evil and you shouldn't even start going down this path, but right now that's what we've got in here. So our service container, we want to register, and we did this in one of the earlier shows. It was one of the ways of doing inversion of control. So we're just going to register our currency view model like that, and now we'll be able to say in the currency view, the code behind for the currency view, instead of instantiating a currency view model, we can be a little bit tidier and say, what was it called again? Service container dot resolve. In other words, some service who's dedicated to getting things, please go get me a currency view model like that. Whew. Okay. And that is, I think, all we need. I think that's all we need. So in here, we are retrieving a currency view model. We're setting it to the binding context for the page, which will flow down and all of the other things. The only thing remaining to do is to actually use it. Oops. So to use it, instead of saying $sign here, and believe it or not, the Xamarin.Forms previewer is actually smart enough to compile the code behind it and run it. So we ought to be able to say binding to, what was it again? The inside of our currency view models, symbol one. Symbol one. Now, I think this is not going to work. So, just yet, because we have to compile. That's why, because we have to compile. And then we'll bind this to binding of display one. Oh, it's getting worse and worse. We're losing everything. Just wait. It'll get better. Actually, let's compile. So I think before we call this episode done, and I think this will be good enough for now. We're going to eventually want to be able to respond to button clicks, and that's going to be a great thing to show for episode 15, and that's how to use command patterns. We've shown it before, but we get to see it again for the Xamarin.Forms world in a future episode. So we'll get a little bit more depth into there, and then we'll get in the next episode into calling into web services, and that'll be cool. That'll be a lot of fun. We seem to have lost everything. Service not found. Oh, yeah, it can't do a service container dot. All right. Well, this would have worked at runtime. What it's complaining about here is it's saying, hey, this service container, you never registered the currency view model, which we did, but we didn't do it in a part of code that this has access to. So maybe we should just new. Or if that's null, do a new view model. Oh no. I don't know. Solver default. Or do we just, I'd like to see, for the purposes of a show, I'm going to just new up that currency view model rather than being all good. And then again, this really shows to how quickly these things break down and how difficult it is, hey, there it is, how difficult it is to get previewers to work well. It really is a hard problem. So there we go, 0.00. I would have, if I hadn't been in the middle of talking, I would have let out a great cheer. When you do the same thing down here, we're going to say binding to symbol 2, and because we've already compiled the code, this should just pop up really fast. Look at that, instantaneous. Very nice. Binding to display 2. Booyah. And I think that's an episode. I think we can call that a show. Data binding to the currency values. And a new currency view model. Right on. So yes, we added a new thing called a currency view model. And the currency view model had a symbol 1, display 1, a symbol 2, and a display 2. And in the constructor, it just set those things. So yes, my name is Lee Richardson, and I approve of that message. I do not approve of this resource designer change, so I'm going to delete it. The startup service, we didn't end up using the inversion of control dependency injection service locator. We didn't end up using the service locator pattern, but I'll check it in so that we can use it at some point in the future. And this was the magic right here. Instead of hard coding the numbers, we were able to use data binding and bind into that view model. And the last piece of hooking all that up was we had to set up binding context right then and right there. And that, I think, is a show. Now, I've shown you how to do this by hand. I think it would be really fun in maybe a future episode to get into, you don't always have to do this to manually set the binding context. There are a lot of MVVM frameworks out there that simplify a lot of these types of things. It'd be fun to talk about that. But for tonight, I think we have learned a lot. This has been a really successful show. We have talked about how to do what the different layout types are and how to align things using the different horizontal and vertical options. And we have talked about, there we go. So we've talked about the different layout options in Xamarin.Forms. We've talked about we've shown the data binding, and we have talked about the different types of views and the different types of layouts in Xamarin.Forms. That's a pretty good Xamarin.Forms overview. That's a lot to accomplish in an hour. I hope that you have learned and enjoyed tonight's episode. If you so, I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe in the YouTube channel. It helps me out a lot. It makes me feel like this is still valuable. So thank you very much for your time tonight, and have a wonderful week. And I guess I forgot to do this. I try to do this every show, and I completely forgot. I'm just going to sneak this in right at the last minute, and that is, this is a siren. They're available on sirenofshame.com, and if you are coming up to the holiday season, this might be a great gift for you to get somebody. They're a lot of fun to there you go. They are a lot of fun to make go off at your coworkers, and they're even more fun when they're hooked up to a continuous integration server, and that continuous integration server is hooked up to the siren via the software, the Siren of Shame software you can get for free at sirenofshame.com. The sirens do cost some money, and they help me out. So, there's my little plug. Just snuck it in. Have a wonderful week, everybody, and thank you for staying tuned.